I think there's a few themes that will cut across what they've shared and what I've shared that I kind of want to give you the summary of this conversation from the beginning. That is, these methodologies are ready to use. They are insightful and add value to decision making. We are asking for your feedback to continue to improve them, and they're going to be released both in the past and over the next few weeks and ongoing in the future. So we've heard a bit about the overall context that this work sits in, and I want to make that a little bit more concrete for everyone. The way that I think about impact accounting, I think it sits at the precipice between two systems that have been in development for quite some time. The first we've heard about is financial accounting. We know that that's been a system that's embedded in our entire economies globally, around the world. It's been developed over hundreds of years, and I think everyone who's in this room can pretty readily acknowledge that it's incomplete because it's not actually capturing social and environmental impacts. On the other side is the state of sustainability disclosures, ESG ratings, and things like that. Over the last few decades, there's been significant acceleration in that space to drive more data and more transparency, but I think everyone in this room would similarly acknowledge where there's some potential limitations and where that work has actually taken us to. And that's because it frequently focuses on practices, policies, outputs of an organization without prioritizing actual outcomes and impacts. It makes it really difficult to actually compare performance across impact topics and across organizations. And a lot of them are actually black box. It's tough to understand what's going on behind them, so there's not enough transparency to really unpack them and think about how useful they can be. It's not surprising, since we're here today, that we view one of the solutions to this challenge is impact accounting. The idea of impact accounting is a system for measuring and valuing the impacts of entities to generate impact information that can actually be decision useful. And ultimately, what that means in this context is it's translating that environmental and social impact into the language of currency. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But at the high level, the benefits of this concept is, first and foremost, it moves the conversation from those outputs and those policies to actual impacts. It enables comparability across these different impact topics and entities and financial performance. It builds on, it does not replace all of the tireless and significant efforts around sustainability disclosures, and it ultimately enhances that work to drive decision making. This might all sound really complex. The takeaway that I think is most important for this audience, and related to what George was saying before, is that while there is a lot of complex work happening to make impact accounting real, it's kind of like that duck on the lake where the top is actually very calm and the work is happening underneath. What is needed for an actual user, you all who could be thinking about how to apply impact accounting, is really just the same type of data that you already are thinking about and looking to collect for your sustainability disclosures to make your decisions. It is then the impact accounting methodologies that we have available and others have available that convert that information into the decision useful conclusion information that we refer to as impact information. The gap between those two is where the hard work is done for you. There are really well-established processes in place, frequently more on the side of policymaking and have been less used on the side of corporate entities that have established through social science, through hard biological sciences, environmental sciences, et cetera, how to go about doing this. And what the work of organizations like IFVI are doing is building on that expertise, finding opportunities to continue to innovate them and push them forward, and then make them available for the actual users like you all to apply them simply and concretely. And so, two really simple examples. George already referred to this. Greenhouse gas emissions is probably the most common example that's used in this space because people are pretty well aware of the idea of a social cost of carbon. You take the greenhouse gas emissions data of an entity across their scopes, and you apply that cost of carbon to that information, and you get impact information about what is the actual damages, what is the actual impact that's being produced by that company. Water consumption becomes a little bit more complex because, as George mentioned, this is about geographic context to understand what is the actual impact that's occurring. So we can take the water consumption, that meters cubed data, we apply where that meters cubed is happening, and then the methodology is looking at what are the ecosystem services in that region? What's the population? What is the socioeconomic status? What are all of the underlying data points that can actually tell you what is the impact of that water consumption in that location? And again, you have impact information. This offers a wide range of potential use cases, including a comprehensive assessment that can be considered pretty parallel to a financial statement, an impact statement or an impact profit and loss statement, if you will. It enables organizations to get ahead of potentially some of the risks that could occur over time. I think a lot of the energy around things like internal costs of carbon is to prepare for a world in the future in which that cost of carbon is actually embedded in regulatory frameworks. You can imagine the same thing on the side of water consumption. Everyone's purchasing water. That cost of purchase is actually not truly aligned with the actual impact of that water usage, and this enables organizations to understand the potential risks of that gap and how they can manage it moving forward. Ultimately, collectively, whether this is for investors or corporate entities, this is about driving decision making. And so it can help prioritize, identify what are the topics that matter most for an organization to manage. What are the actual opportunities to drive improvement in a thoughtful, rigorous, and quantitative way. With additional data, it also allows the opportunities like what George was referring to actually directly link this to financial performance and understand how these impacts actually drive the value of a company and their ability to generate revenues and profits in the future. So let's take an actual example of what that looks like using greenhouse gas emissions. This is a data set from 4 real companies in the same industry. We've anonymized it to add a little bit of mystery. You can potentially ask me later if you want to know what those companies are. But you've got financial performance on the top, and you've got greenhouse gas emissions on the bottom. Historically, this is one of those never the twain shall meet situations. They are in different metrics. They are difficult to understand what are the connections between them. With impact accounting, what you can do is you can attach the value of those greenhouse gas emissions impacts and combine that with the financial performance to generate new types of insights. So here you can actually see how the overall greenhouse gas emissions represent a percentage of the overall revenues of those companies. You can actually work your way down and think about price earnings ratios of that company. So not just about revenue, but what is the profitability of that organization? If carbon was priced in our economy, how would that profitability would be affected? And ultimately how that could actually trickle down to the price earnings, the valuation, and the prioritization of those different impacts. You can see here that the insights are new compared to the slide before. You're able to see which of these organizations are performing at a whole different level with this data. And this is only including greenhouse gas emissions. Imagine applying that across all of the other topics so you can look at it comprehensively and then also within those individual topics. Moving on from sort of the introductory explanation, I think it is important to acknowledge that IFVI and the people who have been speaking to you so far have not been doing this in isolation. And in fact, even over the last few weeks, I think there's been immense amount of momentum and effort and investment to continue to carry forward this work and really usher in this idea of the era of impact accounting. And so without going into all the details of the many different organizations who are pushing this work forward, we've highlighted a few as examples. And I'd love to just ask for like a quick show of hands for people to look around the room. Who's done work in impact accounting before? So you can get a sense of all of the different people here who have been pushing this forward. I'm happy to give a quick round of applause to everyone there. This is work that historically has been a little bit fractured. There's some proprietary work, there's different efforts that are happening across different organizations. And what I think is really key in this era of impact accounting is that over the last few years and months, we've seen significant efforts towards more collaboration, and that's just something that's really, really exciting. In my view, it kind of mirrors some of the efforts that have occurred on the sustainability disclosure space and is now happening on the side of the accounting valuation space as well. IFVI's view is for this era to continue and to really have impact accounting fulfill its potential. Impact accounting needs to have methodologies that are public good. They need to be independent and credible, and that includes a wide set of inputs into what is available and what is informing what can be used by these different entities and organizations, and ultimately collaborative. It doesn't mean that there is one single answer to any of these challenging questions, but there is an opportunity to create a system that collectively works in a way that meets all of these needs and enables comparability and efficiency in the system to actually make this usable and accelerate it moving forward. That is what IFVI aims to do with our methodology development processes. As George mentioned, we have an independent governance body that is called the VTPC. There are several members of the VTPC in this room that is bringing in all of the inputs of our due process and informing what are the methodologies content that can then be presented to the world. As Rob mentioned, we are incredibly thrilled in this moment to be able to offer to the world a pretty near comprehensive suite of methodologies, particularly on the environmental side, while we are continuing to develop new methodologies to expand on and add on over time. There have been some incremental releases of this work over the last 2 years as IFVI has existed, but this is the most significant moment in our work so far as an organization because of that comprehensiveness and because of the quantity of methodologies that are now available on the market. That starts with what Rob referred to as the 3 exposure drafts that we have just released yesterday for public exposure period. Your feedback is so important to this work because it not only helps us assess the quality and credibility of the content of it, but it also ensures that it's actually useful for the people who ultimately, ideally, are trying to drive and change the world. And so my first ask of you all as a part of this presentation is to take a look at the drafts in the public comment period, see what you can learn from them, and see what kind of feedback that you want to provide to us so we can continue to improve them as we finalize them. Rob mentioned the topics that we have covered. They are crossing our 3 various work streams, which includes general methodologies, which is really aiming to establish the fundamental principles of this system and make them transparent for the market to understand. And then specific topic methodologies that are, as I like to say, where the rubber meets the road and where users can actually begin to very directly implement them. That includes a water consumption draft on the environmental side and an occupational health and safety draft on the social side. Rob also alluded to the exciting interim methodologies that we've been working on with an aim towards enabling the market to begin implementing impact accounting on a near comprehensive suite of environmental topics specifically. One of the promises of impact accounting is this idea of comprehensiveness and holistic assessment. And therefore, while each individual topic methodology can be really powerful and informative, they are exponentially more valuable when they're able to be applied together to understand how those different impacts intersect with one another. And so as Rob mentioned, we finalized a greenhouse gas emissions methodology. We have a water consumption methodology that is available for public exposure right now. And then we are releasing over the coming weeks 4 new environmental methodologies on water pollution, air pollution, waste, and land use. As we've already alluded to, really besides greenhouse gas emissions, environmental impact is very locally contextualized. And so one of the powerful aspects of these methodologies is that they are incorporating the specific data points of geographic locations around the world and are covering a really substantive scope of individual specific pollutants. You might be looking at something like water pollution and air pollution and realize there's actually a number of air pollutants and a number of water pollutants. And there's over 130 specific pollutants that are able to be incorporated into these methodologies, which enables basically any user to be able to identify what are the most relevant impacts and geographies for their particular context and be able to apply these methodologies out of the box. So it's a near comprehensive, ready-to-use set of methodologies for almost every possible use case at this stage. These methodologies are intended to not just be talked about, but intended to be used. And one of our goals is to always make sure that the work that we are doing is accessible and understandable. And that not only involves having our work be released as a public good, but it also means releasing resources with those methodologies that actually make them understandable and it's possible to build on top of. And so to give you a preview of what these interim methodologies are actually going to look like when they're released, you're going to see a number of different resources that accompany them. There are methodologies that explain how to use them and what actually goes into them at a high level. There are models that get into the quantitative nuances of how those different value factors are calculated. In circumstances where the geographic scope might still be missing some very specific locations, the release of those models also allows users to start to add to those geographic locations, and so that can be an ever-expanding database for organizations. There's going to be technical assistance manuals that enable people to understand how to actually apply those models and dig into some of the data. And then finally, there's the global value factor database that's going to be the set of specific value factors across pollutants, across topics, and across geographies that are ready for use by any individual organization, investor, entity who's ready to start impact accounting. This is just the beginning. This methodology is ready for use now, but it will continue to be expanded upon and grown. And so here is a preview of the specific topics and some sample topics that we are either working on developing right now or we anticipate developing in the future. This is nowhere near comprehensive. There are many more topics that would be developed over time. The intent here is really to just show that this is itself a continually evolving journey. I think we all, as a room, share a pretty common vision. We know that the world has its challenges, and we want to create a just and sustainable global economy. It's certainly our view, the folks who are going to be speaking as a part of this, that impact accounting can be one of the most significant contributors to that vision, and we're excited to bring that alive and make that available for the people who ultimately are the ones making the decisions using these methodologies. And so I'm happy to wrap up on that note and hand it back over to Katie. And I also want to share that I'm myself particularly looking forward to the panels that we're about to hear like how this work can actually come to life. Thank you.